Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to everyone who joins today's session, focusing on developing guidance and sharing lessons on co-management in Asia. My name is Kwang-Seok Oh, Senior Fishery Officer at FAO. I'm a overall moderator for this webinar. First of all, I'd like to give my much appreciation to TPTI for giving us the great opportunity of having this webinar on the World Oceans Day. This webinar will discuss fisheries co-management in the context of Chapter 5 of the Small-Scale Fisheries Guidelines, which deals with governance of tenure and resource management. As you are aware, the fisheries co-management can be defined as a partnership arrangement in which the community of fishers and government share the responsibility and authority for the management of the fishery. It has been recommended to achieve equitable governance outcomes and sustainable development in the fisheries sector. So in this context, this webinar will focus on exploring the selected countries' co-management experience in Asia and share with you and FAO's draft guidebook for evaluating fisheries co-management effectiveness in the situation where there has been a lack of systematic approaches to evaluating co-management performance. This is the today's webinar agenda. Turan, please share the agenda. To begin with, we'll watch the 4-minute video on Chapter 5 of the SSF guidelines, emphasizing the importance of responsible governance of tenure and sustainable resource management, following a housekeeping rule and the first poll. Thereafter, at the second session, there will be 2 presentations on the 2 countries' fisheries co-management experience from Vietnam and the Philippines, and then an additional presentation on the FAO's guidebook to evaluate fisheries co-management effectiveness, which is under development. And then there will be a Q&A session as the last session. Next slide, please. Here are our speakers and staff working for this webinar. So Ms. Yumi-sun will take up the poll, and Dr. Nguyen Tu Hue from the Center for Marine Life Conservation and Community Development of Vietnam will deliver her presentation on the Vietnamese fisheries co-management experience. And then Mr. Ruquelito Mancao will deliver his presentation Philippines experience in the fisheries co-management. And then Dr. Raquel Sanchez-Tirona will take up the questions associated with this presentation during a Q&A session. And Elizabeth Matone, a fisheries officer from FAO, will deliver her presentation on the FAO's guidebook on the fisheries co-management evaluation. And Ms. Tran Rahim Zadeh, a FAO consultant, will technically support to get this session run smoothly behind. And Ms. Lena Weston will be a Q&A session moderator. Now we'll watch a 4-minute short video on Chapter 5 of SSF guidelines.
Over 50% of the fish catch in developing countries comes from small-scale fisheries. This provides food and nutrition to millions across the world. These fisheries, in turn, employ 90% of capture fishers. So, unlike the name suggests, small-scale fisheries actually contribute a lot to all our lives, and this contribution needs protecting.
In 2014, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations endorsed a set of guidelines to protect and enhance small-scale fisheries around the world. These guidelines highlight the need to secure tenure rights to natural resources for small-scale fishing communities. Tenure systems determine how individuals and communities gain access to land, fisheries, and forests. These systems also define what these resources might be used for how long, and under what conditions, governing how all stakeholders can come together to manage them.
So, why are tenure rights important? Well, for one thing, securing these rights is key to the development of small-scale fishing communities. Sadly, states often consider the seas and water bodies to be no man's lands, controlled by governments, which means local fishing communities often have no legal right to them. These rights are also vital for women. Their roles are closely linked to their community's rights over the lands they inhabit and the waters they fish in. Indigenous people are also affected. Many still hold on to their traditional tenure practices, but their rights are often not recognized or respected. Industrial fisheries and investments can threaten the livelihoods and resources of small-scale fishing communities. Add to this the growing demographic pressure and the effects of climate change, and the responsible governance of tenure becomes even more urgent.
That's where the small-scale fisheries guidelines, guided by a human rights-based approach, can help by defining the role of all the stakeholders in advancing tenure rights. For example, states should not remove or relocate small-scale fishing communities from their habitats without reason. This in turn ensures that these communities continue to manage and conserve their resources like they have for generations. The states must identify and protect all legitimate rights holders, particularly women and indigenous groups. To ensure equitable access to resources, states should reserve fishing zones for small-scale fishing communities.
And with a view on the future, states must empower these communities to effectively exercise their tenure rights. Whenever states enter into fishing agreements with foreign fishing fleets, the interests of small-scale fisheries must be protected. Communities displaced by natural or man-made calamities should be supported in restoring their lives and livelihoods. Also, small-scale fishing communities should have access to impartial administrative and judicial bodies to resolve any disputes or conflicts, big or small.
Secure tenure rights create incentives for users to conserve and sustainably manage the resources they depend on. As a part of this commitment, small-scale fishing communities should be consulted and encouraged to actively participate in the management of their fisheries. This would allow them to prevent all forms of destructive fishing practices by monitoring their fisheries and ecosystems.
On the whole, secure tenure rights go a long way in improving the well-being and livelihoods of these communities. With the SSF guidelines as our North Star, we can work together towards a sustainable and equitable future for these communities and the planet as a whole.
Why co-management role is important for securing tenure rights and the sustainable management of the fisheries resources at community level? Because co-management helps them to be achieved by partnership arrangement between government and the fishing communities in a participatory way on a voluntary basis. So fisheries co-management is now well written in SSF guidelines, which is essential for SSF to be practical and sustainable on the ground. As you can see now, there are 3 bullets associated with fisheries co-management in the SSF guidelines. The SSF guidelines emphasizes participatory management system, that's co-management. And that the roles and the responsibilities between concerned parties and the stakeholders, and the equitable participation of men and women in the fishery-related decision-making processes. Okay, now I would like to invite Ms. Yumi Son to share with you the housekeeping rules and then the following the poll to give you an ice break question. Yumi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So I'm Yumi Son, fisheries consultant, to introduce about the housekeeping rules. Please check the chat box to find the information we shared and select the Q&A button to enter your questions to the panelists. They can either reply back to you via chat box in the Q&A window or answer your questions live. To answer the polls, if needed, please follow the links provided in the chat box during the poll time. As you can see, Kwang-seok mentioned, we prepared the several poll and interactive tools. So please follow the instruction in the chat box. And please kindly note that the meeting will be recorded and live streamed on YouTube at this link. Our colleague will share this YouTube link, so you can also check our recording later on as well. Thank you for your attention, and this is our project website as well as our contact email address. And please subscribe to the COFAM newsletter. Thank you. So to begin with, we prepared one poll to know more about our participants. We will launch the polling, and please click your your type of institution are you affiliated with. We will open this poll for 1 minute and then close. Okay, poll is closed. Okay. We got 9 votes. I don't know, the poll is closed. I will relaunch polling. I don't know, we are only 9 or I can see more 20 participants. I will relaunch the polling. Okay. All right. So 14 answered our poll, and we can see from academia and research institute, government and international organizations, but most are from NGOs. Thanks for participating in our poll. Now is over to you, Kwang-seok.
Thank you, Yumi. Now we are in the second session for sharing 2 countries' experience on fisheries co-management. So the first presentation will be delivered by Ms. Nguyen Tu Hue from Center for Marine Life Conservation and Community Development, Vietnam. Ms. Nguyen, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Vietnam. I would like to share about the co-management of small-scale fishery resources in Vietnam and from the experience from Center for Marine Life Conservation and Community Development, MCD, my organization, facilitate. So I'm going to talk about the picture of how co-management in Vietnam as a whole and the area where we work in Central Coast of Vietnam. We also use one of the case study in one of the commune to tell you about the process, about the SWOT, and also the way forward. So some facts and figures for you to understand about the fishery in my countries. So last year, 2020, fishery production total reached 8.3 million tons from both capture fishery and aquaculture, and export value reached $8.4 billion US. So you can see that the country have finalized the last 10 years of implementing national program on fishery resources protection. And now we are preparing for the next 10 years. It's very momentum for us. However, the issue remain with the pollution and the pressure on coastal areas and also depletion of resources. And we see that the role of the small-scale fishery is very, very important in this context. So when we're talking about the co-management, we need also integrated policy. So that is very momentum for us to talk about this. So I would like to invite you to the area where we work. So this is, you look at the maps of Vietnam where we have a very long coast. And in the central coast of Vietnam, we work with the province called Bình Định province. So the area we call locally managed marine reserve. In the last few years, we introduced ecosystem-based approach in fishery management in Quy Nhơn City. So the area includes 4 communes. So commune is the lowest administrative units of our governance structures. So to talk about the very small scale fisheries, you can see that in terms of population, each of the commune has maybe 500 people, and then the largest one is about 3,000 people. So the coastal communities are very much dependent on the fisheries. The total areas we are talking about here in our project areas is around 36,000 hectares. It's very critical habitat with coral reef for important fishery species. So I would like to zoom you closer to the commune where we are working. I'm not going to pronounce each of the commune, may be challenging for you, but in this area, you can see that the area allocated for co-management is quite small, 8 hectares, 12 hectares, 5 hectares, 20 hectares. So the total of 46 hectares. So it accounts for just 0.12% of the total marine areas I mentioned above. And the official decision to allocate these rights for the co-management group just happening the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021. Why? Because by the end of 2017, fishery law of Vietnam is passed. And after 2 years, it's become fully in effect. So the co-management is officially practiced and recognized in the law very recently. However, the co-management is practiced already for 2 decades in the countries. So you can see that in this area, very representing Vietnam coastal areas, where the key activities engage fish harvest, fish marketing, other activities like ecotourism. So all together also creating pressure on biodiversity and the resources. So in terms of governance, these areas also have private support. So when we're talking about the whole areas, locally managed marine reserve, we already have introduced the ecosystem-based approach. For fishery management, they have a plan and guidelines approved by the Quy Nhơn City, and also the area, the practice has private support from the World Bank co-management program, and recently from the small grant program from Global Environmental Funds support. It's very important that we came in and we also have a lot of good experience. So in terms of highlights of the last few years, we provided capacity building for the community and the stakeholders. So we also demonstrated EAFM in the area and neighboring provinces, a lot of raising awareness, restoring coral reef, and especially we engage in working with the community in IUU combating. And the key highlight I would like to speak is about the official recognition of the co-management in fishery law, article number 10, talking about co-management in Vietnam. So now I would like to invite you to zoom further to one of the communes. Why we choose this commune, Nhân Lý commune, where the area allocated to the community called Bãi Dứa, because this is the first commune in the country practice co-management according to the fishery law 2017. So you see that the area allocated is only 8.2 hectares. So when we do assessment of the resources, the coverage of the coral reef is about 54%. The co-management group have 65 people representing about 2,000, the total population of the commune. And they have selected 17 core members representing them as a committee of co-management. And they have drafted 2 important documents, the regulations of how the co-management group working, how decision is made, and also the regulation, or we call management plan of how fishery is managed, how they deal with their resources protection. And the 2 documents are officially approved by Quy Nhơn City People's Committee after a wide and deep consultation facilitated, and we are very proud to work with the community and stakeholder in this process. And of course, with support from fisheries sector level at all level, including provincial fishery department. So you can see that key content of co-management plan. The people have very straightforward. The goal is to manage and protect coral reef ecosystems in the area, protecting breeding areas and habitat for key species, contributing to sustainable restoring resources and other livelihood options, and of course, providing sustainable income for the local communities. The key activities also identified in this management plan: zoning, so people know where the zone is strictly protected, where the zone they can have some activities, and the activities that they can be conducted in a more responsible manner, like fish harvest, production of aquaculture or ecotourism. Monitoring of how the activities are made, and also very important that to monitor on a regular basis of coral reef health and fish stocks. So you can see the key elements mentioned in what we call fishery management plan or co-management plan, the members of the groups, how the boundary is demarked or made, how the fishing rights, participatory surveillance, and importantly that when the violation taking place, how the people are engaged in decision process. So for summary, there are key 6 steps for co-management process in the country according to the new law, revised fishery law. You see that resources assessment in a participatory way, consensus building, zoning, drafting regulation, consultation, submission of the drafted regulation, and finally announcement and launching for implementation. So among the steps, each of the steps have its own importance among the process. But consultation to ensure that small stakeholders, including women, especially the one who highly dependent, are engaged in the process. And not only fishery sector, but other sector engaged who are used also the resources. So I show some picture of how people celebrating the launching of the co-management committee in the commune. You see that they are very happy to have the launch. And people do raising awareness activities with the fishery resources, how they put the demarcation for the area assigned to them. And very important that the local community fishers engage in the monitoring of coral reef and the fish stocks. So from the process of working with the people in the area during the last few years, we have some important lessons. We see that the strength point that if you look at the area allocated to the community groups, there are small areas, 8 hectares, 5 hectares, or very important that it has biodiversity values, and it is relevant to the capacity of the local group to exercise their right, to exercise their management capacity. And the area also have enjoyed previous support from World Bank, from the Global Environmental Fund small program, and it's lawful now to implement co-management. And on the other side, we also realize that the co-management group, even being established lawful, but they're still challenging by the capacity when it came to the enforcement, how to make sure that people, all people from the whole community, from other community, respect the regulation that has been approved. And even the ideal situation that people can enjoy the financial income from their co-management activities. But for the startup, for the first time being, there are certain financial resources needed for the management group to work. And we see that now it's a very right momentum in Vietnam for people like us, because the government, both central and provincial, also want to look for lessons learned, invite for good lessons learned and practice for policy building. And we also see the conflicting and in terms of threat with other businesses like tourism, like other big players. Maybe they can have a negative impacts on the biodiversity or on the coral reef. So the way forward from the experience we gained during the last 2 years, we would like in the next 2 years to scaling up good practice of what we learned from this site to other 5 sites in central coast of Vietnam, not only in the province, but also another 2 neighboring provinces. So through communication, networking, collaborators, capacity buildings, we would like to leverage the impact because now it's lawful and very important to share the lessons, not only success, but also about the failures, how to engage, how to empower community, how to make sure that governance is there, and to make sure that criteria for evaluations. And like I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of preparing the National Action Plan for Co-Management, contributing to the next 10 years of Vietnam program on fishery resources protection for approval. So it's very momentum for us to implement co-management as contributing to the guidelines, voluntary guidelines of how small-scale fisheries can exercise their rights. So we are very happy that we work with the Directorate of Fisheries of Vietnam at all levels. And we also have a technical and financial support from a number of our funders like ADM Capital Foundation, Oceans 5, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, and importantly that from the ICSF, also supporting us working on how to combat IUU in the small scale fisheries areas. So that's my presentation about co-management in Vietnam. Thank you very much. I look forward to having your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nguyen, for informative presentation. We noted that for Vietnam, the fisheries law recognized fisheries co-management in 2017, and the new fisheries co-management national program from 2021 to 2030 is about to launch at the national level. That's a very good point. And in the Bai Dua case at the local level, I'm glad to see well-established co-management process and plan, such as clear goals and the boundary, active participation, and dispute settlement mechanism, and the fishing right allocations, and livelihood consideration. But we also noted a lack of enforcement against IUU and the lack of financial resources for self-sustaining. Thank you so much for your presentation. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Roquelito Mancao to deliver his presentation on Philippines experience on fisheries co-management. Mr. Roquelito, you have the floor.
Yes. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So, on behalf of Rocky and the team here from the Philippines and Rare, I will be delivering this presentation. Sorry. So, proud to present the co-management in the Philippine context. We learn lessons from the Fish Forever program implementation in the Philippines. So as you know, the Philippines is really the center of marine biodiversity based on some authors. And we have more than 36,000 kilometers of coastline with over 900 coastal municipalities. And we're almost 2 million people or registered small scale fishers are actually residing and depending really on our marine resources for livelihood. And our ocean is really the center of like intersection of biological importance and high human dependence, especially for livelihood and health of our people and even our economy. So let me tell you a bit around what is the municipal waters and the area of the Philippines where co-management discussions would really emanate from. So municipal waters in the Philippines is considered like a 15 kilometer from the shoreline towards the offshore. And it's actually resided by over 40,000 people with around 1,000 to 300 fishers. Imagine how many fishers are actually living in that coastline. And the revenue generation or the revenues from these local government units or these municipalities are from first class to fifth class. So that actually also um, downs to how much budget that the local government later would allocate for managing the fisheries. And we are a bit actually fortunate here that because our constitution supports the co-management, as you may see on the screen, that so the state is actually supporting or protecting the rights of subsistence fishermen, especially for our local communities in the use, in giving like the preferential right to use the communal marine and fishing resources. And this constitution was further supported by the promulgation of the Local Government Code 1991 that actually supported the devolution of management of these waters to the local government units. These are the cities, municipalities, and provinces in the Philippines, and even barangay or village level. That is the first framework for really delegating the management of these waters. And this was further supported by the passage of the National Fisheries Code in 1998, Republic Act 8550, and now amended, and really emphasizing or supporting the rule of the municipalities and cities to manage their municipal waters up to 15 kilometers. And these laws also and these other documents have provided so many avenues for co-management in the Philippines. I think it has the most number of types and forms. If you're actually in the session yesterday with Too Big to Ignore also, you had witnessed actually how most of this arrangement was exclusively discussed. Like for example, there was a discussion on the indigenous peoples communities in Palawan, who is co-managing with the government in their municipal waters. You heard about Fisheries and Aquatic Resources Management Councils, who is actually very essential in the passage of a policy in the Philippines. And then we have so many different organizations and associations here in the Philippines, including alliances of entire local government units. You can see all of these types in examples of co-management in the country. So if you look at the previous slides, we can see that the policy support is there, and there are actually framework for co-management to thrive. Our greatest question is, so the greatest challenge is how does the co-management agreement or plan would be actually implemented, emphasizing really the role of the government to co-manage this with the communities. And so many projects have actually implemented so many capacity building and activities relative to co-management in the Philippines since the 1950s, I think. And Fish Forever, the global program of RARE, the first global strategy for fisheries, was in the Philippines, built up from the experience actually from the long implementation of the coastal and fisheries management program in the country. And we actually think those projects that has paved the way for us to learn so much in terms of community-based management. And what we actually added as in building up on this experience of the Philippines is to emphasize really the preferential use of the municipal waters, emphasizing what is in the law, and then strengthening this with the policy, and really emphasizing the role of the local government units in capacitating the local communities, and of course strengthening the managed access, the reserves as part or as a main strategy to replenish the fishing grounds and the marine resources. So we piloted Fish Forever in 3 municipalities in the Philippines, and one of these municipality is Camarines Sur. We particularly selected Lamit Bay in Tinambak, Camarines Sur, emphasizing or implementing the strategy of Fish Forever, which is actually managed access plus reserve. We actually strengthened the existing reserves of the site, plus arrange the fishing outside of this reserve to actually make the reserves more sustainable. Plus also design and zone other uses outside of this waters, because as you know, fishing is not just the activity outside of these reserves. There are so many different uses, from tourism to aquaculture or mariculture to other uses like forestry and among others. And so the process is not short, but it's really long. It's somehow expensive and intensive because we actually started from profiling. We employ participatory profiling to really know the landscape of the fisheries in the area. We surveyed habitats, we surveyed resources, including human resources, to understand actually the socioeconomic condition of the fishers as our target audience, as the main target audience of the program. And we also employ participatory workshops and consultations, including the design of the managed access area. And then the reserves was also reviewed to look into its optimal locations, and also if it is actually properly sited, or the size is enough to cover the wide range of the species that the communities want to actually protect. And so all of this profiling to consultations to designing workshops to again consultations lead into the passage of the ordinance that actually solidify the design of the managed access area plus the reserve. And the same ordinance actually created a co-management structure in Lamit Bay. And as you can see in the slide, there's like a structure that defines how each of the sector work with the government and the multi-sectoral board in terms of implementing the co-management areas. And aside from the main body, there are committees that were actually organized, all attuned to the program that is designed for the co-management ordinance, and then the co-management plan later. Most of the committees organized in the NAMBAC was actually on fisheries management that actually upholds or the registration licensing system of fishing, and then catch monitoring, which is very important undertaking in a co-management system, enforcement organizations, and of course, there's a specific roadmap for the committee and the program in terms of community engagement and behavior adoption activities. And all of this, just like what we emphasized earlier, in order that the management board or the management team has a guide in terms of implementing the co-management, a co-management plan was actually developed. We are proud that this is developed in participation with the local stakeholders in the area. And so the main components of the co-management plan are almost the same as what the first presenter actually presented. But we really emphasize here the design in terms of granting fishing privilege, especially to the local fishers in the area, which actually came from the 5 villages of Lamit Bay. And they also established rules in terms of fishing outside of these marine reserves as a way of incentivizing themselves and protecting the no-take areas or the marine reserves. So we see some successes in the implementation of Tinambak, and we replicated the same in 40 plus countries all over the Philippines. And this time we used really emphasize the use of science. We look into the habitats, important habitats of the sites. For instance, this is in Siargao. This is in the eastern seaboard of the Philippines. We look at the species that the community wants to protect, and we modeled using science. We modeled them in terms of their connectivity using the hydrodynamic movements, and we use this decision in terms of defining or expanding existing marine reserves, or establishing new ones, and later towards determining network of marine reserves. And aside from determining the exact locations of these reserves and their optimal sizes, we learned a lesson to actually streamline the process from a very small area, Lamit Bay before, as managed access plus reserve area. We just adopt the municipal waters as a de facto managed access plus reserve area. But again, looking into the design in terms of the uses, because like what I said earlier, there's so much uses of this area, and it is not just used for fishing. So in order to allocate the optimal uses of the sites, and so that other uses are not actually affected or affecting to the other use of the municipal waters, we conducted a full workshop participatory designs to complete the zoning process. We include both the support of the regional partners, the national government agencies, and the province to help municipalities and cities arrive at the optimal designs of their municipal waters. And we are proud that in all of this process, from providing until the planning, until the launch of the or the implementation of the plan, all the stakeholders were actually involved. So we have learned so much from the implementation of Peace Forever and co-management in different locations in the country, but we actually believe that there's so much to be done, especially in the number 2, where there should be an emphasis in terms of how does the community actually benefit in the co-management system. And as a strategy, we increase the avenues for the communities to actually participate, so that themselves can actually understand first the rule in terms of the co-management agreement, and later also demand their benefit, or ask if they benefit themselves in the co-management arrangement. So as a behavior change organization, we have different approaches in terms of how to engage communities and promote positive behavior for fisheries, and including involving women and establishment of savings clubs, which is actually for the financial resilience of our fishing communities. However, as we continue to implement co-management and Fish Forever in the Philippines, we are asking these two very important questions. First is, how might we leverage actually these community groups to become venues for participation on a day-to-day basis, given that these are all volunteers, and in the Philippines sometimes it's really hard to actually call for a meeting without any snacks or any remunerations. And the second part is how to devolve the authority and resources further to the village level, so that a mayor, or at the municipal level, the mayor will just actually lay the grounds in terms of implementation, while at the barangay or village level, they can actually improve their participation as the first form of a local government in the municipality. And actually, we take that as a challenge in the coming days in terms of how we capacitate this very important form of local government in each of the municipalities. By doing such, we actually want to see that each of the municipalities we are working with would also see the gains of true co-management, just like what the experience in Tinambak, where there were increase in the biological or ecological um, indicators. Also that the communities could still enjoy the benefits of co-management, even there's a transition in leadership, and we can see how other uses of tourism, or sorry, in terms of municipal waters, could actually complement with the fisheries management, such as how could tourism become complementary to conservation efforts, but not totally like going outside of what is the co-management plan. And then third is with the impact of COVID into the supply chain, we hope that co-management system could supply sustainably the fish we need for the communities, and so that the value chain will not be disrupted. So to end my presentation, I would like to share this very important quote from one of my favorite enforcers in Tinambak. And actually his story is very inspiring for me. And I hope it will inspire the rest of the world and the rest of us who are actually listening this presentation, and to inspire us more to act now to save or to do something for our oceans. With that, I would like to thank our partners in this Fish Forever implementation, especially to the people of Tinambak and the rest of the communities we are working there, and to the rest of our donors and funders and the national government agency partners, and to the rest of you here listening to my presentation. Thank you, and good afternoon to all.
Thank you, Mr. Roquelito, for your intriguing presentation. For Philippines case, it was very impressive to see that Philippines has a very strong legal basis for co-management and tenure on its constitution and the fisheries court and the local government court. I noted the two case studies show well-organized fishing folk association and indigenous communities for sharing avenues for co-management participation and zoning for multiple uses. And streamlined process for concerned fishers or communities to be on board, working together for fisheries co-management. And a fisheries co-management plan showing good practices, getting consensus over the use of fisheries resources in a democratic way. However, we also note that note two challenges that are needed to build more capacity of a local government to exercise its authority and manage its waters effectively, and empower communities to participate in decision-making process positively, and creating incentives for compliance with the regulation. Thanks for that. Now we are going to have the second pool exercise using a Mentimeter. Yumi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Now we can see about 30 attendees are in this webinar. I will share the link, Mentimeter. So please click the link and go to the page. And the question is, what three words describe a successful co-management arrangement? Please enter 3 words and I will share the result. We will open like about 1 or 2 minutes and then I close. We have 30 more seconds. Okay, so we can see many attendees answered as the 3 words describe a successful for co-management arrangements are participatory and the government support, partnership and strong legal basis, empowerment, equity, and also other words showing the holistic and inclusive community participation, science-based approach, also voluntary awareness, financial mechanism, resource sharing, women and men, evidence basis, and more. Oops. Yeah. We can see the big 3 words are participatory, strong legal basis, government support. Thank you for who participated in this brief interactive activity. Over to you, Kwang-seok. Thank you.
Thank you, Yumi. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Elisabetta Mattone, Fishery Officer from FAO, to deliver her presentation on the guidebook for the evaluation of a fisheries co-management effectiveness. Elisabetta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kwang-seok. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. In this presentation, I will introduce the main contents of the FAO guidebook for evaluating fishery co-management effectiveness. This guidebook is being developed with the support of 2 FAO projects. The 2-year project Fishery Co-Management Capacity Development Program, funded by the Korea Maritime Institute, and the 5-year project Fishery Co-Management Capacity Development for Brook Communities, Sustainable Fisheries and Diverse Livelihoods, funded by the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries of the Republic of Korea. This project is also abbreviated as Smart Fishery Co-Management Project. The overall goal of the project is that all stakeholders, especially policymakers, have a better understanding on the concept of fishery co-management to establish systems at both national and local level and implement programs on the ground. Together with the guidebook, other knowledge product will be produced. A publication featuring several case studies based on the application of the guidebook, a toolbox to help the guidebook users by providing more detailed suggestions on how to carry out the evaluation, and e-learning course to provide practical guidance for the use of the guidebook. The approach taken by FAO to arrive to the production of these outputs is that of consulting with experts. With the input of the first virtual expert workshop held in September 2020, an advanced draft of the guidebook has been produced. And with a second virtual workshop that was held last May, an advanced draft of the toolbox and a list of tools has been included in the toolbox. So this guidebook offers a process and method to evaluate the performance of a fishery co-management system in order to enhance its effectiveness in delivering benefits and in contributing to environmental, social, and economic sustainability and good governance. While fishery co-management is more commonly referred to small-scale fisheries, this guidebook presents a flexible approach that can be applied to all operational scales of fishery and is to be used to evaluate system at fisheries, community, or sector level, or in a specially defined area. While it can provide relevant insights, it's not designed to evaluate a national legal, policy, or institutional framework, or to evaluate an entire system, but it focuses instead on a co-management component. The primary audience for the guidebook is those that commission the evaluation and those who carry out the evaluation. But these audiences may include, but not be limited to, the government at different levels, fishers, other resource users, donors, NGOs, research centers, institutions, and academic institutions. The guidebook consists of 5 sections. The first describes the purpose of the guidebook and delineates the context. For example, the FAO's international frameworks related to fishery co-management, including the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenures, and the SSF guidelines. Second, it includes a discussion on the various definitions of fishery co-management, the good practices and models. And then it presents an overview of the adaptive policy analytical framework for the evaluation. And then it presents the evaluation process and steps that I will introduce in the next slides. Then it describes the post-evaluation and adaptive management for systematically learning by doing, and it provides extensive information, among the others, on the indicators to be included in the evaluation. About the fishery co-management definition, that we know that now is a widely accepted approach to fishery governance, but there is no a single definition as the concept is broad. The following definition has been adopted in the guidebook and define the fishery co-management as a partnership arrangement in which the community of local resource users, the fishers, and the government share the responsibility and authority for the management of the fishery, with the support and assistance as needed of other stakeholders, for example, the owners, the fish traders, the fish processors, etc., and external agents, for example, NGOs, academic and research institutions. As there is no one definition, there is no one model and process for fishery co-management. In the guidebook, several success factors and good practices has been identified, and they have been categorized as follows. Under enabling environment good practices, those that are external to the system itself. An example of good practices is that supportive legislation, policy, rights, and authority structure are in place. Then under the category co-management system good practices found in the system itself, we have several broad categories. Under accountability and transparency, an example of a good practice is that co-management is conducted in an open and transparent manner. Under feasibility and performance, an example of good practice is that there are defined boundaries of the co-management system. Under participation and equity, an example is that there is recognition and involvement of different resource users and community members, including youth, women, indigenous people, and others with a stake in the future of fishery. And under the category of rule of law, an example is that the scope and scale of rules are appropriate to local conditions. The evaluation of co-management effectiveness in the guidebook is linked to operational monitoring and adaptive management, the process of systematic learning by doing. So the evaluation provides a formal way to learn what has and has not worked well, and for the people to understand how and why the practices are being adapted. In the approach, it's recommended to undertake the evaluation in two complementary parts. Evaluate the implementation design and process of the system, which means how well the system was developed and how well it functioned compared to existing good practices, and evaluate the achievements of the goals and objectives as stated in the fishery co-management plan. It also recommended for the system, in order to perform the evaluation, to meet a minimum requirements, to be in operation for at least 2 years, and to have a written plan that includes clearly stated goals and objectives. In the guidebook, is recommended for the evaluation to be participatory, involving resource users and primary stakeholders in the design, data collection, and analysis. And it's also stressed that it's important that there is adequate representation of both men and women, youth and indigenous people. The process is undertaken under 3 steps, and each step is composed by several tasks. Under step 1, planning, the planning involves the task needed to undertake the evaluation. And we have several tasks that go from develop a work plan, timeline, and budget for the evaluation, clarify the purpose and scope and scale of the evaluation, establish the evaluation team, etc. And then the second step, the compilation of information, involves the description of the context and of the system design and process. And finally, the third step, describe how to carry out the evaluation, including the collection, management, analysis of the data that are required. As I said, each step is composed by several tasks, but within this task, 5 key tasks can be identified. And under the step 1, the planning, the key tasks are to identify the key criteria related to the success factors and good practices to use as a basis for the evaluation of the system, and also identify the plan, its goals and objectives. Second key task include the selection of the indicators, and for this purpose, the guidebook provides 2 assessment sheets with a list of indicators that can be included in the evaluation. Then, under the third step, the evaluation itself, we have the key task measured indicators. The relevant information needs to be gathered for each indicators, and this may include from database, written notes from the evaluation members, or other source depending on the data management system in place. Depending on the system in place and the data collection, the measurement of indicators can be done in different ways, whether in a quantitative or qualitative way. Then, once the indicators has been measured, the results should be analyzed. For the result to be useful, and it's important to understand the reason behind the score of the indicators. And the last key task include sharing the results and discussing them with the identified target audiences and identify the way to adapt the management practices to improve fishery management. Thank you all for your attention, and these are our reference, and we will share them also in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elisabetta, for the very informative presentation. Now we are in Q&A session. Please feel free to ask questions or make comment on the three presentations. For this session, Ms. Lena Westerland will be a moderator. Lena, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kwan-Suk, and thank you very much to the presenters for these excellent presentations on the different field experiences of co-management and also on the guidebook that we are developing. We have not seen a lot of questions in the Q&A, but we have one for Vietnam on the work there. And the question is whether there has been plans for extending the work and also if there are some particular challenges that can be seen with doing so. So I would like to ask Mrs. Hui to reply, please, if possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, the MCD also already started our works at both the community level and also the national level. So we work with the DFISH of Vietnam in compiling the lessons learned. So at the same time, we also share the practice in two neighboring provinces in nearby the location that I presented before. So the answer is yes, we expanding. And the challenge we found that is there, like I mentioned in my presentation, that despite the fact that co-management practice is taking place for almost more than decades in Vietnam, but co-management as regulated by the recent fishery law is very recent. So that the co-management also have to be adaptive to the law. So that is also the challenge where the community-based groups have to be very adaptive, both to the law, to the legal requirements, and also to their own capacity. So that is my answer.
Thank you very much. So we have another question for you. Maybe we continue with Vietnam a little bit before we also talk about the Philippines and the guidebook. And the question is, what are the particular challenges that the communities and governments face in monitoring the marine waters? Is that something you could elaborate on as well, please?
Yeah, we also find one of the challenges is how to monitor the marine resources, because it's not only require the participatory from the community member themselves, but also need to have some guidance from the science. So like the monitor the coral reef health or the fish stocks. So they need certain methods to implement in the right ways. So that will be served as the basic for evaluation later. So the challenge is how to do it right, how to do it in compliance with the science and with the capacity of the local groups. People like MCD, like us, also the outsider, the facilitator, but the one who actually do the job is the community members. And that the challenge is how they make sure that their ownerships become the pride, but not become a burden on themselves. So the participation of other stakeholders is very important. So here I mentioned the research base, the communication actors, the government supports, and others.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see that capacity of all the different partners in a co-management arrangement is very important, and maybe something that one needs to work on over a longer time period to be able to achieve the results. I would like now to go to the Philippines, and I wonder for the if Mr. Lito could talk a bit about many examples that you have of co-management in the Philippines. If you could tell us a bit more, what elements of those previous efforts are you trying to continue, and what are you doing differently? So a bit more about what you have learned from your experiences and the way forward.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Lina. So actually, there's so much lessons from previous implementation of co-management in the Philippines, and most of them we are actually sustaining. For example, strengthening the People's Organization or the Fisheries and Aquatic Resources Management Council. We are actually banking on them in terms of policy. We are working with the fisher folk associations on the ground as our first ally actually in terms of conservation and sustainable development. We are also heavily working with the inter-LGU alliances as a form of co-management, especially in our vision for scale, like in a broader ecological scale and social scale. What we are trying to do differently actually in the Philippines, first is really bringing back or instilling back the pride of the resources from the fishers themselves. So it's really making them realize that they are actually the ones who are enjoying the benefit of a well-managed resource, and therefore it's their pride actually, because it's their source of income, it's their profession in the first place. And also in terms of capacity building, we are emphasizing the role of science really in terms of how does the management board could also do fisheries decisions with backup in terms of science and data. So we are also employing digitized data collection in the Philippines. For example, in our sites, we are introducing our fish as an application to digitally collect data so that it could actually feed into the different fisheries management decisions. We will be doing capacity building of this management board so that themselves could be informed in terms of how to adjust fisheries harvest control strategy or harvest control rules, so that along the way, when data is there, and along the way they can adjust their co-management plan, and then they can actually decide in terms of what's best for their fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may, maybe a bit of a follow-up question on this capacity development. In very practical terms, because you talked a bit about this, and when you say then you need to improve the management skills and so on, what do you do in practice? Do you have formal training courses, or do you have some technical person who's there helping them on a daily basis? Could you maybe describe a bit at a day-to-day practical level what it actually means, this capacity development, or give an example?
So our strategy is actually because of one, our staff is really limited, and we are, already that we are working on limited resources. We do different levels of capacity building. We crafted even like a competency plan for framework plan for our partners from the municipalities and cities. We created campaign teams there and capacitate them in terms of the different elements of the Fish Forever implementation. We followed a concrete roadmap in terms of what are the training and capacity development skills or workshop that we will be implementing to our partners, so that along the way they can they can be our main ally of implementing activities at the community level. We also capacitate our provincial partners and regional partners from the national government agencies. We call them co-delivery partner. So we partnered with them in terms of delivering the technical assistance to the local governments, so that their lack of manpower also could be augmented. As you may know, actually in the Philippines, there's so much, there is really a lack of investments in terms of human capacity at the local level or the municipalities and cities. If you look at into the governance structure, there are only 1 or 2 workers for fisheries in the cities. So we are trying to augment both capacity in terms of their skills, at the same time augmenting their capacity in terms of human resource, so that there will be additional warm bodies that could help them in the implementation while training their local staff in the delivery of the Coastal Resource and Fisheries Management Program. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I was wondering if I could ask a similar question to Ms. Sue about in Vietnam, if you have similar challenges with regard to skills and also to just having the number of people there to help, and what activities are you undertaking concretely and practically to improve capacity? Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Sue, you're muted.
Oh, yes. I share a lot with the idea that my previous speakers in the Philippines shares. So when we're talking about the capacity building, so we also split our partners into different ones. Like I mentioned, at the national level, we're working with the Directorate of Fisheries. So when you mentioned about the leadership transition, it happened everywhere. So we already have people trained on co-management, and then they move the jobs, or they reorganize their organization. So the process of capacity building is on the rotational and continuous. It's not only being done once. So we do the same. So even the same workshop, the same training, but we don't have to do only once. And then we also bring the opportunities for networkings. Like I can mention that we work in the 6 different sites of co-management, but they have totally different background. They start differently. Some start early, some start later. Some are strength in this part, but the other is strength on the other parts. So we bring them together to facilitate the discussion on networkings. So that also capacity building. And we also have a network of champions. We call co-management champion in the countries. So we hope that in the next 2 years, we have a number of champions in the country providing technical and other support to the co-management in Vietnam, to help the governments. And very important that we don't work alone. Even we are project funded and also facilitated by a non-state actors. But in each of the sides, we work closely with the government, fishery department or sub-department. Is there also mandate to build the capacity for the local community groups. So we do our best to align our energy with the government. So that is how we see the capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to hearing how things happen in reality out in the field, in where people live and where livelihoods need to be supported. I would like to move now to a couple of questions to Elisabetta on this guidebook that is being developed. And one question is, how does the guidebook uphold participatory monitoring of marine resources and ensuring that all stakeholders, women, youth, fishers, and governments are involved in the process?
Thank you, Lena. First of all, I want to stress that the guidebook is currently under development. And what the guidebook is doing is describing the process for evaluating co-management system and plans. And in each steps, it provides the tasks and activities to be completed to be completed and a list of questions that the evaluators can reply to in order to perform the evaluation. But about providing detailed monitoring measures or systems, about systems, what the guidebook is doing is providing a list of good practices for the system based on the existing experiences. And the guidebook has to be associated with the related toolbox, because in the toolbox, the users will have the list of templates to help the users in performing the evaluation. So, for example, when we have the task related to planning about having a work plan and a budget, then the toolbox should provide templates for performing, for developing the budget and the work plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Another question that is a bit related to that as well then, and I mean, I know you have explained that the guidebook is for co-management arrangements at all scales and for large and small scale fisheries, but does it provide specific monitoring measures or systems that can be applied by communities and governments? How does the guidebook help communities to be able to maybe do evaluations by themselves? I realized you have maybe in part answered this already, but maybe you could explain a little bit more again on this.
Yes, maybe for explaining this, I can provide an example, because as I said before, in the guidebook we had the guidebook identified good practices, and an example of good practices is about having regular interaction, which means regular and active and participatory meetings, and for sharing, for discussion, for building trust, etc. So what the guidebook is doing is, based on this good practice, to develop indicators to allow the users to see if this good practice is in place in the system. So, for example, in the indicators can be that the regular, active, and participatory meetings have been held. And what is also doing is giving tools, suggesting tools for measure the indicators, which in this case could be, for example, having a questionnaire survey and or observing the meeting themselves, and or having the minutes of the meeting in order to reply to the indicators. So the guidebook is giving a tool, a way of performing the evaluation.
Thank you, Elisabetta. We have received a question from the YouTube live streaming. So I would like to return to Mr. Lito and Mrs. Hue. Maybe you could both make a comment on this. The question is, what common sources of funds do you utilize to finance co-management? I do think, Mr. Lito, you mentioned that there's always a lack of resources, but maybe you could still say something on this topic.
Sure, Lena. So, yes, funding is always like a good question, because I have been working in this sector for several decades, but the question in terms of how much funding is enough is not actually answered in terms of investing for coastal fisheries management programs. So in the Philippines, the first source of funding really is the local government units. Although there's no specific law in terms of how much would a local government unit would fund, but so our work here really is to enjoin all of these mayors and the rest of the municipal council or city council members to allocate funds in terms of implementing the co-management plan. But currently, we also actually explore blended finance or blended sources of funding. We encourage like the private sector also would invest into the program, aside from the government, the local and the provincial and the national government. we also even explore how does the communities could actually contribute something to the coastal and fisheries management program. So for instance, our savings clubs on the ground have the social fund, and some of this very small but actually very important funding is used to fund some activities like coastal cleanup or magun planting, among others. But again, we welcome different sources of funding through the blended finance scheme, and also there's a new development in the Philippines in terms of the full devolution. So we hope to take an opportunity with that new rule, so that we can encourage LGUs to allocate directly the right amount of funding based on the resources, or based on what is outlined in the co-management plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can see now that we're almost running out of time, but I still wanted to give the opportunity to Mrs. Huet to maybe add, if there's anything you'd like to add, a very quick comment, if the situation is similar in Vietnam with regard to funding as in the Philippines, or if you have different strategies.
Yeah, I think that is similarly, and blended funding it look like that is the way forward. So the government in Vietnam, when put the article on co-management into the law, we also have identified the community based co-management funds. So that also become illegal to mobilize funds for co-management, but ideally it comes from the activities at the site. And for us as a non-state actor, we also see the number of sources now for co-management, but we also prefer sustainability coming from the own protection and harvest taking place in the co-management site, where it in return again have provide incentives on sustainable way for the people who conserve it. But for the time being, I think blended funding is still a way forward.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a very interesting topic, and also co-management has been around for a little while. I can hear that there are also new ideas and a lot of work is being done. So we look forward to following what is happening both in the Philippines and in Vietnam. And also, of course, the further development of the guidebook that we hope will be useful for all of you who are involved in co-management. With that, I think I need to close the Q&A session, and I will hand back to Kwan Suk for concluding this webinar. Thank you to all.
Okay, thank you, Lena, for your nicely leading the Q&A session. Thanks for that. And thank you so much for your attention to this webinar's presentation and discussions. We learned a few challenges to be addressed and the directions to move forward, responsible governance of tenure and the sustainable resource management from those three presentations. A few lessons we've learned could be as follows. I can provide a few. The first, supporting legal and institutional framework can facilitate the emergence of development of co-management because it contributes to clarify and legitimize fishing rights of fishery resources. And then a well-written co-management plan with clear goals and objectives at community level makes fishing communities more sustainable in terms of 3 pillars of sustainability. And lastly, it's essential to provide capacity building programs for related stakeholders at all levels to improve the performance of the fisheries co-management activities in a participatory way. There are many more, but given the time constraint, I'd like to close the lessons we can learn from those three presentations. Before wrapping up this webinar, I would like to give much appreciation to TBTI once again for allowing us to hold this webinar. Also, I'd like to thank all audiences from all around the world for joining this critical webinar. Last and but the least, much appreciation must go to the three presenters and the FAO staff, Lena, Yumi, and Turan working behind. See you next time. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yumi, please set up a meeting different space.